What happens when the mind breaks? Not in the quiet solitude of a man's home, but beneath the shadow of gods that do not sleep. In the Imperium of man, madness is not a sickness. It is an infection, a whisper, a slow, gnawing echo from beyond the veil. It begins as a thought, a question, something heretical, dangerous, human. And then it grows teeth. There are 10 billion worlds in the Emperor's domain, and on each one someone is losing their mind tonight. A scribe in a data vault who sees words rearrange themselves into prayers that were never written. A guardsman who wakes screaming from dreams of golden wings melting into black fire. A preacher who hears laughter when he prays. The Imperium does not forgive madness. It fears it. It hunts it. Because madness in this age is not a matter of the mind. It is a door, and every door can be opened from both sides. In the hives of Septima Obscura, the sky was the color of rust and dying plasma. The people lived stacked upon each other like the dead, countless, faceless, forgotten. Down in the sump levels, there were places even the enforcers would not tread. The air shimmered with incense and rot. The walls wept. And among those shadows lived a man named Erethus Kale, a mid-level scribe in the administratum, a man who once believed that faith alone could steady the soul. He worked 12 hours a day cataloging tithe reports, numbers upon numbers, worlds upon worlds. It was said he could recite entire subsector populations by heart, but lately the numbers began to whisper, a missing zero, a flicker in the data, voices between the lines. At first he ignored them. Then he started listening. It began innocently, a pattern forming within the endless calculations, something too deliberate to be random. Every seventh record contained an anomaly, a world that didn't exist, a code that translated to a single word. Awaken. He reported it to his overseer. The man laughed, told him the machine spirits were fickle, and suggested more sleep. But Kyle couldn't. The word followed him even into his dreams, carved into the eyelids of saints, whispering through the cogs of prayer wheels. Awaken. He stopped eating, stopped praying, began to write what the whispers told him. His parchment filled with spirals, holy sigils inverted upon themselves, equations that made the servo skulls jitter and retreat. When the Inquisition came, they found him in the center of his hab, surrounded by glowing lines of ink, a circle that pulsed like a heartbeat. His eyes were gone, burned out from within. He was smiling, and every data slate within a mile radius displayed the same symbol, an open eye, watching. The locals said it was witchcraft. The Ordo Hereticus called it contagion. But the truth was simpler and far more terrifying. Erethus Kale had looked too long into the pattern of things, and something had looked back. This is how madness is born in the Imperium, not as rebellion, but as revelation. To go insane in the 41st millennium is to become aware of something you were never meant to see. The veil between reality and the warp is thinner than parchment. Every thought, every dream, every prayer is a thread across that chasm. And when the mind frays, the threads twist. They become pathways. And something in the dark begins to listen. On the shrine world of Lothara, a saint was said to have wept blood for 7 nights. The pilgrims called it a miracle. The ecclesiarchy called it proof of divine agony. But the truth was whispered only among the confessors, that the saint had heard voices in her sleep, voices calling her not by name, but by memory. She began to paint what she saw, an endless ocean of souls, screaming without mouths, reaching toward a light that would not save them. Her art was burned, her hands were bound, yet she smiled as the pyre was lit. And when her ashes scattered, the wind carried her last words. He watches through us all. There are those who say the warp does not drive men mad. It merely reveals the madness already there. In the Scholastica Secana, they teach the young that the mind is a fortress, walls built of discipline, bastions of faith, gates sealed by will alone. But what they do not tell them is that the warp does not break walls. It seeps through them, slowly, patiently, like water through stone. Cadet Leora Vane was 12 when she first saw the color that did not exist. The instructors said it was her imagination, a flicker of the Imperium, a test. But the color followed her, bleeding through mirrors and the edges of her sight. It whispered promises, not of power, but of peace. By 17, she stopped responding to her tutors. She spoke to things no one could see. Her power grew. So did her silence. When they finally chained her for transport to Terra, she looked at the confessor with pity and said, "You build your walls out of prayer, but the wind is inside them." The transport never arrived. The reports were sealed by the Inquisition, marked with sigils of secrecy and dread. But fragments remained. Fragments of audio recovered from the wreckage drifting near the Eye of Terror. A girl's voice, calm, distant, speaking to something unseen. They said madness is weakness, but I see now it's clarity. The warp is not the storm, it's the mirror, and we are the ones screaming into it. Then, static, and silence. In the great archives of Terra, the custodians walk halls filled with the names of the lost, billions upon billions of lives. Most were consumed by war, others by faith, but some were devoured by their own minds. And in this dark millennium, the two are often the same. Because in the Imperium, sanity is not the absence of madness. It is obedience. It is silence. To question, to feel, to dream too deeply. These are crimes of the soul. Yet somewhere in the cracks of forgotten worlds, there are those who have gone beyond madness, who claim to see what lies beneath the Emperor's light. They speak of shapes in the warp, of gods made of thought and hunger. They say the Emperor himself dreams, and that his dreams bleed into ours. Perhaps they are mad. Perhaps they are prophets. Perhaps in the 41st millennium there is no difference. Once a remembrancer wrote, "To live in this age is to exist within the Emperor's shadow, and shadows have eyes." Across the galaxy, the Adeptus Mechanicus have records of machine spirits that babble in languages older than stars. In hive cities, whispers crawl through vox channels, speaking in the voices of the dead. Entire regiments have vanished after a single shared dream. And always, it begins the same way. A thought that should not be thought. A question that cannot be asked. What happens when you go insane in Warhammer 40,000? You stop being human. You become a mirror, and something begins to look through you. On the world of Eremnos, the silence after Exterminatus lasted 3 years. Then Vox traffic returned. At first it was faint, distorted, but the signals were clear enough. Laughter, human laughter, echoing across a dead planet. When the Imperial ships approached, they found the world untouched, its cities whole, its cathedrals pristine. But the people were statues, every single one. Frozen mid-laughter, eyes wide open, mouths cracked and dry. The Adepts examined the Vox towers and found a signal broadcasting from deep underground. A repeating message. "We are free now. We have seen him." And he was laughing too. The Mechanicus purged the records. The Inquisition ordered silence. But some who were there, those who stood on the ashen surface of Eremnos, say they still hear that laughter in their sleep, and they wake with blood on their lips. Perhaps the human mind was never meant to survive the 41st millennium. Perhaps every prayer, every battle cry, every whispered act of devotion is a plea against an inevitable truth, that we are creatures of fragile flesh, walking through a universe built for monsters. But there are those who still listen, those who seek what lies beyond reason, beyond the veil. In the depths of derelict ships, in the chants of dying priests, In the hum of machines older than memory, something stirs. They say the Emperor guards us from the warp, but what if he guards the warp from us? The question lingers, unanswered, unwelcome, echoing across the stars like a curse. And in the silence that follows, something begins to whisper again. A word, a command, a promise. Awaken. The word awaken spread like a contagion, not across comms or parchment, but through dreams. The psychers of 100 worlds began to twitch in their sleep, whispering the same syllable in tones that made the air vibrate. Even those without the gift began to feel it. A pulse in their skulls, a flicker behind their eyes. It was not speech, it was invitation. In the void above Carthus Secundus, a regiment of the Astra Militarum was lost to silence. Their last message, cut through with static, contained the words, "The light is beneath us now." When the fleet arrived, the ships were empty. Not destroyed, simply abandoned, their corridors humming with unspent energy, as if the men had stepped out of reality itself. On the surface of the same world, a missionary named Luthien walked the streets of a city half in ruin, half in prayer. Every wall was carved with litany. Every window bled wax from candles that had burned for days without fuel. He saw faces twisted in rapture, mouths dry from endless chanting. The Emperor's name was on every lip. Yet when he listened closely, he realized the rhythm was wrong, too slow, too deliberate. They were not praying to him. They were praying for him. In the Basilica of St. Altheon, a cardinal stood before his flock, trembling as he read the latest edict from Terra, that the recent rise in the Awakened was to be purged without hesitation. Yet he hesitated. He had seen one of them, a child, eyes white with fever, speaking truths no one had taught him. "The Emperor weeps in his tomb," the boy had said. "He does not dream of us any more. When the child died, his blood did not clot. It turned to dust." In the Schola Progenium, drill sergeants barked louder, priests lashed harder, discipline became faith's new armor. But behind closed doors, the whispers spread among even the loyal. They said the Astronomicon flickered for the first time in millennia, that navigators saw not light, but a shape, vast, golden, and unmoving. Some swore it was the Emperor's silhouette, others swore it was his corpse. Sergeant Dalen Varro of the 117th Cadian Remnant wrote in his journal, not for confession, but for memory. He had seen a comrade turn his lasgun on himself after claiming the stars were singing. He'd seen commissars shoot men not for cowardice, but for silence. The regiment fought without orders now, only habit. And sometimes in the moments between artillery barrages, Varro thought he could hear something breathing beneath the soil. The soil itself was sacred once. It was said to carry the Emperor's blessing. Now it smelled of rust and decay. Farmers on the agri-world of Tethra found their crops growing in shapes that resembled faces. When they burned them, the smoke formed words. The local confessor called it a test of faith. By the third week his voice had vanished, leaving only a blackened throat and a sermon unfinished. In orbit, the Inquisition gathered. Lord Inquisitor Ral's ship drifted like a blade among the stars. His agents spoke of the spreading madness with reverence and fear. Some said it was the ruinous power's latest deception. Others whispered it was a warning, that the Imperium's faith had curdled into something the warp could no longer ignore. Ral, silent as a corpse, simply watched the hololith of the segmentum map. Every day, new signals marked the worlds gone dark. He called it the blooming. On the shrine world of Sancta Morn, the Sisters of Battle held their ground against unseen forces. The enemy was not demons, nor heretics, but the faithful themselves. Entire pilgrim convoys had begun self-immolation rituals, claiming to light the way for the Emperor's awakening. The sisters burned thousands to save millions. But as the flames rose, the canonists heard voices in the fire. "We are not your enemy," they said. "We are his reflection. The silence after each purge was unbearable. Whole cathedrals stood empty, the air heavy with ash and echoes. One sister, Novicia Saren, began to dream of golden fields and a man walking among them, his face hidden by light. When she awoke, she found her armor scorched with handprints that did not match her own. Back on Terra, the Adeptus Custodes felt something they could not name. Their gene-wrought perfection shuddered under a pressure unseen. One among them, Shield Captain Alric Dinar, reported a sensation while on vigil before the Golden Throne. He described it as listening to a heart that has forgotten how to beat. He was reassigned, then erased. The High Lords met in secrecy. Their arguments echoed through marble corridors. The Ecclesiarch demanded more executions. The Fabricator General demanded silence. The master of the Astra Telepathica simply stared into nothing, muttering, "The veil is thinning." In the underhives, the masses began to worship new saints, those who had gone mad yet never died. They painted their faces with soot and blood, chanting verses that bent imperial scripture into shapes unrecognizable. They called themselves the Dreamers of the Throne. For them, insanity was not corruption. It was communion. The Adeptus Arbites descended in force. Streets ran red with loyal blood. Yet still in the gutters, dying voices sang, "He dreams of us again." On the world of Varhast, where night lasted 6 months, an entire regiment refused to fire upon rebels who claimed to see angels descending through the aurora. When the Inquisition arrived, they found no angels, no rebels, only soldiers standing motionless, eyes glazed, whispering, "It's beautiful." They executed them all. Yet the corpses did not decay. Inquisitor Rao visited the site personally. He found the aurora shimmering with impossible patterns, forming runes that seemed half Latin, half human thought. His retinue recorded the data. Then, without warning, the lights dimmed and a voice filled every vox, every skull, every heart. Do not fear awakening. Fear what comes after. When the light returned, Rao's ship was gone. His fleet drifted without command. Only his throne remained. A blackened skeleton seated upon it, mouth open as if still mid-prayer. Weeks later, the Adeptus Mechanicus received encrypted signals from Rao's personal archives. The data contained no words, only a recording of a heartbeat that matched the rhythm of the Astronomicon itself. The Ecclesiarchy declared the event apocryphal, yet pilgrim traffic to Terra doubled overnight. The faithful wanted to hear it for themselves, the sound of God's heart. At the edge of Segmentum Solar, a fleet of Imperial ships returned from the void, their hulls inscribed with phrases no man recognized. Servitors muttered scripture backward. Vox channels carried hymns sung in reverse. Astropaths who tried to translate went blind. Meanwhile, on Tethra, the ground split open. From beneath the soil rose not demons but statues, thousands of them, human forms carved in perfect likeness, each bearing the same expression, serenity. They were dated to an age before the Imperium existed. The Mechanicus deemed it impossible. The Ecclesiarchy deemed it heresy. But one lowly adept, before being silenced, wrote, "They are us," before we began to dream. Back on Terra, a custodian approached the throne room and found the air vibrating with a low hum. The light from the Astronomicon flared. Not brighter, but alive. The Adeptus Mechanicus screamed as their sensors registered the impossible. For 1 second, the Emperor's body moved. Just once. A twitch of a finger. A breath that was not mechanical. Then, stillness. But something had changed. Across 1,000 worlds, preachers fell to their knees, blood streaming from their eyes. Pilgrims began to convulse, speaking in tongues unknown to any lexicon. Entire fleets lost communication. On a planet in the Ultima Segmentum, the dead began to speak through Vox arrays, whispering the same line over and over. He is not sleeping. He is remembering. In the void between worlds, Where time bends and stars scream, the warp flickered. Demons howled, but for a heartbeat, even they were silent, as if listening. The Ordo Malleus declared exterminatus on 5 systems simultaneously, claiming corruption beyond containment. Yet whispers among the Inquisitors spoke of fear, not certainty. The warp storms had begun to retreat, not expand. And the light of the Astronomicon pulsed like a living heart. Then came the betrayal at Heraxis Prime. The planet had been a shrine to loyalty, a bastion of imperial faith. When word came that its governor, Lord Previn Thule, had declared independence, no one believed it. Until the broadcast. Every screen, every servo skull, every shrine displayed his face, serene, radiant, eyes glowing faintly gold. His voice was calm, terrible, divine. "My emperor does not demand obedience," he said. "He demands awakening. You worship his silence because you fear his truth. But he remembers us now, and he is no longer alone." Across the system, millions knelt in confusion, terror, awe. The ecclesiarchy screamed heresy. The Inquisition readied its fleets. But before the order to fire could be given, the entire planet vanished in a surge of golden light. Not destroyed, not consumed. Erased. In the void where it once orbited, only dust remained, forming a symbol, a single, radiant eye. Some say it was chaos reborn under a new guise. Others whisper it was the Emperor's will, unshackled from the cages of faith. No one knows what truly happened on Heraxis Prime. Only that, in the months that followed, millions began to dream the same dream. A sky of gold, and a voice whispering beneath it. Awaken. And this time, when they opened their eyes, they did. The light of the Astronomicon pulsed, not steady, but broken, like the heart of a dying god. Every navigator across the Imperium felt it, the flicker of divine guidance, the tremor of something immense stirring behind the veil. Ships went astray. Fleets vanished into the dark between stars. The galaxy held its breath. On Terra, the priests of the ecclesiarchy filled the void with song. Billions gathered before hollow altars, their voices rising in desperate unity. But their hymns sounded hollow now, too loud, too perfect, as if they sang to drown out the silence that followed. For in that silence, something answered. A whisper, a pulse, a single phrase carried through the warp like a current of thought. He remembers. In the fortress cathedrals of the Segmentum Solar, the Sisters of Battle burned every heretic they could find. Yet their enemies multiplied not through rebellion, but through belief. Entire convents vanished overnight, leaving behind symbols etched in fire, an open eye surrounded by golden tears. Some claimed the emperor himself had walked among them, not as light, but as a man. Others claimed it was something wearing his face. Sergeant Vero of the 117th Cadian sat in the mud of yet another battlefield, staring at the bodies of men who had died praying. The war against the awakened had no front lines, no logic. One moment they were brothers in arms. The next, their eyes would glow with impossible calm, and they would march into Lasfire without pain. He wrote in his journal, the pages slick with blood, "If faith is the weapon of man, then belief is the disease, and I think it's killing us." In orbit above Eremnos, the Inquisition gathered again. What remained of it? Lord Inquisitor Varn spoke to a hall of ghosts, men and women too afraid to look one another in the eye. They argued about truth, about blasphemy, about the meaning of awakening. Varn ended the debate by drawing his bolt pistol and firing into the ceiling. "You speak of faith as if it were a candle," he said, "but the Emperor was never light. He was the shadow behind it." None dared to answer. Meanwhile, on the world of Haleth Prime, the Adeptus Mechanicus unearthed something buried deep beneath their forged temple. A sphere of obsidian metal, humming softly, emitting faint waves of psychic resonance. When deciphered, the patterns formed words in Benharic so ancient that even the Magi wept to read them. I remember the beginning. Hours later, the entire Forge world went dark. Only silence remained, echoing through the noosphere like the last breath of a machine spirit. The Adepta Sororitas began to fracture. Some still followed the Ecclesiarch's command, purge, burn, sanctify, but others had begun to listen. Canoness Mirabelle of the Order of the Veiled Star claimed she had spoken with the Emperor in her dreams. She said he was not angry, he was tired. Her sisters called her heretic, but when they came to execute her, they found her chapel empty, the candles still burning, untouched by time. Across the galaxy, statues began to cry golden tears. Voxcasters broadcast voices that no one had transmitted. Whole regiments knelt mid-battle, weeping without cause. The Mechanicus said it was interference from the warp. The Ecclesiarchy said it was proof of divinity. But the soldiers said nothing. They simply fought, because fighting was all that remained. On the void ship Redemption's wake, a psyker convulsed during prayer, screaming that he could see Terra burning in gold fire. His heart burst, yet his lips kept moving, whispering the same phrase again and again. The throne is empty. The custodians felt it too. Within the Sanctum Imperialis they stood motionless as a sound filled the air. A heartbeat, faint but undeniable. Some fell to their knees. Others turned their blades upon themselves, unable to comprehend holiness that moved. The Emperor's body did not stir, yet the air around him shimmered. Not light, but distortion, like heat over desert sand. Tech priests working in the vaults below began to vanish, their flesh fusing with the metal of the golden throne itself. Data readouts went mad. The Astronomicon flared, and then dimmed, pulsing in time with that unseen heart. Meanwhile, in the ruins of Heraxis Prime, the vanished world returned. It appeared without warning, surrounded by a halo of molten light. No Vox signal, no defense grid, no life signs. Explorators were sent to investigate. They found cities made of glass, shaped in the likeness of human faces, frozen mid-scream. And in the center of the planet, upon an altar of gold, lay Lord Thule. Still alive, still smiling. His eyes were gone, replaced by light. When the adepts tried to speak to him, he simply whispered, "He woke up inside me." Then, one by one, they began to burn. The Imperium called it contagion. The Ordo Hereticus called it ascension. But none could stop it. Planets began to vanish into light. Ships disappeared without trace, leaving echoes of prayers in the void. The warp itself shifted, not red with rage, but gold with hunger. And yet, within that apocalypse, there were those who still believed. In the shattered shrine of Saint Altheon, missionary Luthien knelt before a broken icon of the Emperor, weeping. Around him lay the corpses of his congregation, faces twisted in rapture. He begged for guidance, and for the first time, something answered. The voice was not gentle nor cruel. It was weary, infinite in sorrow. "Why do you call me Emperor?" it asked. "That name was never mine." Luthien screamed for forgiveness, but the air turned thick, shimmering with visions. He saw the birth of the Imperium, not as glory, but as theft. A dream stolen from something older, something radiant. He saw the Emperor's face before the throne, not divine, but human, worn with grief, and behind him, shadows wearing crowns of flame. He awoke among ashes, his hands blackened, his faith shattered. Yet he smiled, because he finally understood. The Emperor was not the god they worshipped. He was the prisoner they chained to faith. On Cadia's ruins, Sergeant Vero watched the skies turn gold. The dead rose without decay, walking into the light. He aimed his rifle but couldn't fire. They weren't enemies. They were calling. His vox crackled, a voice familiar and calm. It was his own, recorded long ago. "You cannot kill what remembers you. He dropped the weapon. For the first time, he prayed, not to the Emperor, but to the silence that followed. In the void, the warp storms split open. From within emerged ships of impossible design, gilded vessels that sang instead of roared. Their crews were human, yet not. Their eyes glowed with the same golden light as Heraxus. They claimed no allegiance. They spoke of the Remembered One. When asked what that meant, they said simply, "He no longer dreams of you. He dreams as you." The High Lords panicked. Edicts of execution spread across the Imperium. Astropaths died in droves as psychic resonance shattered their minds. The ecclesiarchy declared the Remembered Ones to be the greatest heresy in history. Yet their sermons faltered, their words drowned by a new hymn spreading from world to world, a hymn without author, sung by the stars themselves. And deep within the imperial palace, the throne room trembled. The golden throne cracked. A single fracture, hair-thin, running through its heart. The light dimmed. Tech priests screamed as their augmetics shorted out. Custodians raised their blades, uncertain if they were defending or witnessing the impossible. The Emperor's lips moved, just once, no sound. But across the galaxy, every psychic, every believer, every dreamer felt the same word inside their minds, not spoken, remembered. And then, silence. For 3 days, nothing moved. Warp storms vanished. The Astronomicon went dark. Fleets drifted blind through the void. Faith itself became a kind of suffocation. Then, on the 4th day, a new light ignited. Not gold, not divine. Something else, softer, deeper, infinite. It did not burn. It breathed, and those who had gone mad began to wake. On billions of worlds, people rose from fever, from blindness, from death itself, whispering the same truth. He was never sleeping. We were. The Imperium fractured. The old faith shattered into 1,000 sects. Some declared the Emperor reborn. Others called it the end of the age of man. The Mechanicus spoke of a second dawn, a universe remade from thought alone. And in the hidden chambers of Terra, where no one should have survived, a lone custodian knelt before the throne. What he saw was not a corpse, nor a god, but a man, ancient, frail, alive. The golden mask cracked. Beneath it was a human face, eyes open, filled not with wrath, but with sorrow. He looked at the custodian and whispered, not in words, but in memory, "They built a god from my silence. Now they will hear the truth." The custodian fell to his knees, weeping. Around him the air shimmered with forms, echoes of every soldier, every martyr, every dreamer who had ever prayed. They gathered like stars around their Creator, not to worship, but to remember. And then, from somewhere beyond the veil, a voice answered, vast, ancient, gentle. Not the Emperor's. You have awoken him. Now awaken yourselves. The warp flared white. Every light in the galaxy blinked once, and when it returned, the stars were no longer still. They pulsed, alive, like eyes opening for the first time. In that moment, every soul in the Imperium, saint, heretic, soldier, child, felt the same realization echo within them. They had not been living in his dream. They had been dreaming him. And now, he was awake. The galaxy trembled beneath the weight of revelation. The Emperor was awake, and the stars no longer obeyed their masters. Faith, once the Imperium's armor, became its wound. Every creed, every order, every oath sworn in his name began to fracture under the impossible question, if he lives, what have we worshipped? On Terra, the air tasted of smoke and ozone. The Astronomicon's beam had returned, but it no longer shone with the same light. It pulsed irregularly, a heartbeat lost in eternity. Astropaths wept blood, unable to bear its rhythm. Pilgrims flooded the holy city, their chants wavering between prayer and panic. Above them, the sky shimmered gold, then black, then gold again, as if reality itself were choosing sides. In the depths of the imperial palace, silence reigned. The golden throne still stood cracked but unbroken. Around it, the custodians knelt in confusion, their faith wavering for the first time since creation. Some swore they heard his voice within the hum of the machines, others claimed to see his reflection move within the polished marble. But the emperor did not speak again. He remembered, and that remembering spread like a contagion. Across the segmentum pacificus, the wars of faith began. Planet turned against planet, system against system. On one world, priests preached surrender to the new dawn, to the remembered one. On another, entire continents burned to prove loyalty to the old faith. Ships drifted without orders, their captains paralyzed between devotion and doubt. The Inquisition split down the center, one faction claiming the emperor sought renewal, the other claiming his awakening was the final test. Neither side hesitated to cleanse the other. Sergeant Vero survived his regiment's dissolution by accident, or perhaps design. The stars above Cadia's ruins burned strange now, amber and pulsing. His men, the last few who still followed, looked to him for orders he could not give. He stared at the cracked soil and whispered, "We built eternity from lies." His vox crackled to life. A child's voice answered, "Then build something true." Viro froze. He looked around, only corpses and the whispering wind. Yet the voice lingered in his mind, soft and familiar. He began walking east, toward the light rising on the horizon. Not dawn, but something deeper, as though the world itself were remembering its own creation. In the void, the fleets of the remembered rose like angels of flame. Their ships glowed with living metal, each hull engraved with human names, not serials, but memories. They did not broadcast orders, only a song. Wordless, mournful, infinite. Wherever they passed, the warp bent, storms fell silent, and the souls of the dead stirred. The high lords gathered in terror. The ecclesiarch screamed of blasphemy. The fabricator general demanded containment. The grand provost called for faith by fire. Yet no decree could halt the tide. The remembered did not attack. They simply approached. Systems surrendered before the first shot was fired. Some called it peace. Others called it the end. In the blackened corridors of a dying ship, Canoness Mirabelle prayed. Her armor was cracked, her faith scarred, but she refused to yield. Around her, the Sisters of the Veiled Star lay dead or converted. Her rosary was melted to her glove. She whispered, "If he has awakened, then my duty remains, to stand between man and his own ruin." The walls trembled with laughter, not mockery, but sorrow. "You cannot guard what wishes to be free," the voice said. She opened her eyes and saw her own reflection weeping blood. Inquisitor Varn stood on the bridge of his flagship, orbiting what was once Haraxis Prime. The planet's surface glowed gold, cities reshaped into spirals of light. He had witnessed worlds burn, gods die, demons scream, but never this. The light was not chaos. It was order made terrible, divine reason without mercy. "If this is his will," he whispered, "then faith was our first sin." He raised his pistol, but before he could fire, the stars outside blinked. Once, twice, and the planet was gone again. Only his reflection remained, staring back with a stranger's smile. Across the galaxy, whispers became prophecies. The remembered claimed to be fragments of the Emperor's dream given form. Others believed they were humanity's collective soul, finally unshackled. But the truth, if such a thing could exist in this age, was darker. The Emperor had awakened, yes, but he had awoken within his people, not above them. His divinity had bled into the species itself, fragmenting across trillions. Every human mind carried a spark of his consciousness. Every prayer, a mirror. The effect was catastrophic. The warp convulsed with overlapping realities. Psychers saw themselves reflected in infinity, unable to tell which thought was their own. Soldiers began to move in unison without orders. Civilians shared dreams, identical down to the last word. Unity became infection, individuality, heresy. Humanity had become its god, and could not survive the weight. The Adeptus Mechanicus screamed heresy at every signal, but in the void forges, their machine spirits began to sing. Entire manufactorums reactivated without command, producing shapes that defied known technology. The priests tried to halt them, but the machines refused, humming the same phrase in binary, "He walks again." On distant Eremnos, the world of laughter, new cities rose from the ashes, not built by hand, but grown. Structures of golden glass pulsed like living hearts. The dead who once stood frozen began to move again, their eyes glowing softly. They spoke no language, but their mouths formed one word: return. The galaxy was no longer dying. It was changing. Yet not all welcomed the change. The Ordo Hereticus unleashed exterminations unseen since the heresy. They burned worlds rather than risk contamination. The flames reached even the stars, but still the light persisted. "You cannot kill a memory," whispered one of their own before turning his weapon on himself. In the cold of deep space, Sergeant Vero finally reached the edge of the light. He found a structure floating among the ruins, half cathedral, half womb, its walls breathing. Inside he found others like him, soldiers, priests, psychers, all silent, all awake. At the center stood a figure in robes of gray and gold. Its face shifted with every heartbeat, now a child, now a king, now a corpse. It smiled, not cruelly but with unbearable tenderness. "You came," it said. Vero knelt without knowing why. The figure placed a hand upon his head. Visions flooded his mind, the birth of Terra, the first spark of hope, the betrayal of gods, the Emperor's silent vigil. He saw everything humanity had been and everything it could be. And then he understood. The awakening was not salvation, it was choice. The Emperor had given them back to themselves. Outside, the remembered fleets encircled Terra. They did not attack. They waited. On the ground, billions gathered, torn between worship and defiance. The custodians stood ready. The sisters loaded their bolters. The Inquisition prepared their final edict. And above them, in the shadow of the palace, the light shifted once more. Not gold, not divine, something colder, sharper. The sky cracked. The warp screamed. Reality itself bent toward a single point: the throne. The custodians felt it first. The pressure, like gravity made of thought. The air shook with unspoken words. The Emperor's body glowed, not with light, but with presence. It was as if all consciousness converged upon that one place, that one breath, that one impossible moment. Inquisitor Varn fell to his knees aboard his ship, his mind filled with the sound of billions praying in unison. Canoness Mirabelle felt her armor melt into her flesh as her soul stretched toward Terra. Sergeant Vero collapsed, visions blinding him, not of battle, but of birth. Every voice, every thought, every memory in the Imperium aligned. The galaxy became a single mind, trembling at the edge of understanding. And then, silence. Not peace, not death. A silence so vast it felt alive. The throne pulsed once, a heartbeat felt across time, the stars dimmed, and all of creation waited to see what humanity, and its God, would choose to become. The moment before history changed forever had come, and time itself held its breath. It began with a whisper. One voice, then 1,000, then 1,000,000,000. A chorus rising through the void. Humanity spoke as one, not through words, but through memory. Every prayer, every scream, every heartbeat reached toward the throne. The galaxy itself trembled, as though the stars feared what might awaken. The light above Terra was no longer gold. It had turned white, blinding, pure, and merciless. the kind of light that burns away illusion. Within the imperial palace, the custodians knelt before the throne. Their armor, once radiant, now reflected only shadow. The machine hissed, screamed, and bled golden fluid. Circuits glowed like veins beneath skin. For a moment, the body upon the throne moved. A single breath, a shudder that rippled across eternity. And every living soul in the Imperium felt it. Some wept, some collapsed, some laughed, unable to bear the truth. Sergeant Vero stood on the plains of Terra, surrounded by millions. The light struck him like judgment itself. He saw visions, the Emperor not as God, but as man, not perfect, not divine, a father who had failed, yet never stopped trying. He whispered through cracked lips, "He's human." The realization spread like contagion. Faith fractured, then reformed into something older, simpler. Belief without worship. Love without blindness. The remembered fleets in orbit began to move. Their ships turned toward the palace, but not to attack. They opened their holds, releasing rivers of golden dust, the memories of the dead, the essence of humanity's long war. The dust fell like snow upon the surface of Terra, coating the ruins, the soldiers, the shrines. When it touched the living, they remembered every sacrifice, every sin, every act of mercy ever committed in his name. The world itself began to weep. Inquisitor Varn stood at the edge of the throne room's entrance, his hand trembling on his weapon. "If this is resurrection," he said to no one, "then it is not divine. It is consequence." He raised his pistol toward the throne, but then he saw the Emperor's eyes open. They were not burning suns, as the old texts claimed. They were tired, human, infinite in sorrow. The Inquisitor dropped his gun and fell to his knees. Canoness Mirabelle reached the steps of the palace. Her armor fused to her skin, her body failing. Yet she climbed. With every step she recited the litanies of endurance, though her voice broke on each word. When she reached the final stair, she looked upon the throne, and saw not a god, but a man in agony. "Then faith was never about you," she whispered. "It was about us." The throne exploded in light. Machinery screamed. The palace shook. Millions across Terra fell as a wave of energy erupted outward. Not destructive, but awakening. Every human mind ignited. Every spark of the Emperor's consciousness that had scattered across the stars returned. In that moment, all of humanity became one thought. In the void, the fleets stopped moving. Orc ways went silent. Tyrannid tendrils recoiled. Even the Eye of Terror flickered, as if demons themselves hesitated to breathe. The universe watched the awakening of its oldest god. And then came the pain. The Emperor's scream was silent, yet it tore through reality. The throne cracked. The light turned crimson. The fusion of humanity's soul was too much, too vast to contain. Billions of minds shattered under the weight of collective memory. Cities fell to ruin, their people burning with psychic fire. Astropaths burst like stars. The warp roared awake, hungry, furious. The custodians tried to approach, but the air became molten thought. Their armor dissolved. One by one, they vanished. Their golden shells turned to ash. Still, they did not scream. They bowed, even as they burned. Vero fell to his knees, hands pressed into the holy soil. His mind filled with voices, children crying, soldiers begging, lovers praying. All of humanity's noise, its pain, its hope, flowing through him like a river of knives. And through it all, one voice whispered, "You must choose." He looked up. The Emperor was rising. Not fully, but enough. The golden light faded, replaced by something quiet, something that felt like the end of time. The Emperor looked upon his creation and wept. And in that tear, Vero saw the truth. To be human was to suffer, and to suffer was to create gods. The remembered began to disintegrate in orbit. Their ships folded into light, their forms dissolving into the void. They were never separate beings. They were humanity's hope, given shape. And now that hope was being reclaimed. Every soul that ever dreamed of salvation returned home. The warp screamed one final time. Its storms convulsed, twisting into patterns resembling eyes, hands, prayers, and then, for the first time in 10,000 years, it went still. No chaos, no demons, just silence. In the throne room, Canoness Mirabelle reached the Emperor's feet. Her body burned away, but she smiled. "We found you," she whispered. He looked down upon her, eyes soft as dusk, and placed a hand upon her head. She vanished in light. The energy released shattered the palace dome. Shards of gold fell like rain upon the pilgrims outside. Varro rose to his feet, covered in dust and blood, and saw the world around him change. The sky, once golden, now shimmered with quiet stars, visible for the first time over Terra in millennia. He realized then that the Emperor was gone. Not dead, not ascended, simply gone. The throne was empty, a crater of light fading into dust. The golden throne, the heart of the Imperium, had become a tomb and a birthplace in one. Inquisitor Varn stood amidst the ruins, his face streaked with tears. "So, this is how it ends," he murmured. A dying custodian beside him replied, "No, Inquisitor. This is how it begins." Across the galaxy, the psychic beacon of the Astronomicon vanished. For the first time, humanity was without guidance. Ships drifted, lost. Worlds descended into panic. Yet on some planets, just a few, people looked up and felt something new. Not fear, not worship, but freedom. The ecclesiarchy crumbled overnight. Priests tore down altars. Others built new ones, not to gods, but to memory. The Mechanicus fell into chaos, their machine spirits silent. For the first time, their prayers went unanswered. But in the silence, a new harmony began to hum. Quiet, uncertain, alive. Varro wandered the empty streets of Terra for days. He saw statues of the Emperor toppled, then rebuilt by trembling hands. Children played in the ash of shrines. Pilgrims knelt in fields, not facing the palace, but the horizon. The human race was still standing, scarred, faithless, but awake. One night, as the sky burned with auroras of lingering warp light, Varro heard the voice again, the child from before. "Did you understand?" it asked. He looked to the stars and said, "No, but I will." The voice laughed softly. "Then that is enough." The next morning, Terra bloomed. Flowers grew in the cracks of ancient marble. The air felt clean, almost kind. The sun rose unfiltered for the first time in millennia. The age of darkness had ended, though none would ever name it so. Inquisitor Varn wrote the final words of the old Imperium in his chronicle. "We sought eternity and found ourselves. May that be enough." He sealed the book and cast it into the river running through the ruins of the palace. Somewhere, beyond the edges of known space, a faint light stirred. A single human soul, drifting, remembering. Perhaps the Emperor, perhaps not. It whispered across the void, its tone neither divine nor mortal. "They are ready." And the stars, for the first time in 10,000 years, did not answer with silence. They sang. The galaxy was not healed, not saved, but it was alive again. And somewhere, in that fragile breath between death and rebirth, humanity learned to dream once more. When the light faded, what remained was silence. Not the silence of death, nor the stillness of peace, but the kind that follows when something vast has spoken its final word. Terra was quiet for the first time in 10,000 years. The sky hung heavy with pale dust that glimmered faintly, as though the stars themselves had descended to mourn. The throne was gone. The Emperor was gone. And yet his absence filled everything. The ruins of the palace stood like the bones of a god, beautiful, broken, eternal, The marble steps were covered in ash that no wind dared move. Where once billions had prayed, now only echoes remained. Pilgrims came still, though none knew why. They touched the cracked stones and whispered prayers no longer directed at divinity, but at memory. The Imperium's heart no longer beat, and yet its ghost still lingered. Sergeant Varro lived among the ruins. He was older now, or perhaps merely slower, as if time itself had grown weary. He spent his days walking the empty halls, tracing the paths of fallen heroes whose names had been forgotten. The golden statues had melted into formless lumps, but he could still remember the faces. Not their glory, their exhaustion. The same exhaustion that now lived in him. At night, when the wind howled through the broken towers, he would look up at the stars. They were different now. Closer somehow, softer, no longer hidden behind the Astronomican's glare. He would think of the wars that had burned a million worlds, and how easily the universe had forgotten them. Perhaps forgetting was mercy. Perhaps it was all that ever saved anyone. The children of Terra grew without hymns. They did not learn the litanies or the creeds. They built small fires in the streets, listening to the old ones tell stories of a man on a golden throne, of angels and demons, of faith that could move worlds. The children would ask, "Was he real?" And the old ones would smile with eyes full of memory. "He was," they'd say, "and so were we." The ecclesiarchy was gone. The cathedrals now served as gardens, filled with silence and vines. Where choirs once sang of war, birds now nested in the rafters. The marble floors were cracked but warm under the sunlight. People came not to worship, but to remember, to speak softly to those who had been, to those who might come again. Humanity no longer prayed for salvation. It simply endured. Inquisitor Varn never left Terra. His hair turned white, his voice soft as parchment. He wrote endlessly, pages upon pages, chronicling not facts, but feelings. The weight of belief, the taste of fear, the scent of sanctity turned to dust. He called it the Testament of Silence. It was said he died with a pen in hand, smiling faintly as the ink dried across his final line. We built eternity from fear, and learned at last to live without it. Canoness Mirabelle became a story told by the sisters who came after. They spoke of the woman who climbed the steps of a dying god and whispered forgiveness into his heart. Her armor was never found. Some said she ascended with him, not as saint, but as companion, a human reminder that even gods must answer to love. Others said she still walked among the ruins, unseen, tending to the candles that refused to die. The remembered fleets were never seen again. Their trails of gold faded into the void. Yet every now and then, a ship adrift in the dark would catch a glimmer, a soft, distant glow like the memory of sunlight through water. Pilots would report hearing music, wordless and ancient. None could record it. None could forget it. The warp was quiet. Psychers still heard whispers, but they were no longer screams. The Imperium had become reflective, calm as a deep ocean. There were no demons, no storms, only shadows of what once was. Humanity had severed its god, and in doing so had untethered itself from madness. The price was solitude. The gift was freedom. Varro, in his final years, returned to the edge of the light where it had all begun, the place where he had heard the voice. The ruins were covered in flowers now, small and pale, growing through cracks in stone once drenched in blood. He sat beneath a broken statue of the Emperor, now weathered beyond recognition. "We were his dream," he whispered, "and he was ours." A child approached, a girl with dark eyes and a small golden charm around her neck. "What was he like?" she asked. Varro smiled faintly. "He was human," he said, "and that was enough." She frowned. "But humans die." "Yes," Varro said softly, "and that's why they matter." The wind rose, carrying dust and light across the horizon. In its sound, for just a moment, he thought he heard laughter. not mocking, but tender, distant, eternal. He closed his eyes and let it take him. When he did not open them again, the child took the charm from his hand and held it to her heart. Years passed. The palace crumbled further, its bones becoming part of the earth. The oceans rose, the stars shifted, the species changed. But humanity endured, stubborn, curious, infinitely fragile. They no longer spoke of gods, but of ancestors, of choices, of stories. And in their art, in their songs, in the way they looked to the stars, the emperor still lived, not as deity, but as memory woven into their very being. It is said that in the far reaches of the void there exists a world of light. No coordinates, no charts, only rumor. Some call it the Emperor's Rest, others the Last Horizon. Those who claim to have seen it say the land is silent and the sky is made of shifting gold. Perhaps that is the lesson left to the galaxy, that faith is not obedience and survival is not victory. That even gods, in the end, must learn to let go. The Imperium was never eternal. It was merely a mirror for the humanity it sought to control. Now, at last, the reflection stands on its own. The stars continue their slow drift through the void, uncaring, beautiful. Somewhere in their light, an echo lingers, the sound of 10,000 years collapsing into a sigh. Empires end. Faith fades. But the dream endures. And so ends the age of the Imperium. Its banners burn quietly in the wind of time. Its warriors sleep beneath the dust of a world reborn. Its god rests, perhaps smiling, at the far edge of creation. We, who remember, write these words not as priests or soldiers, but as witnesses. We record not triumphs, but truths, that every empire is a prayer, and every prayer in time becomes silence. Was the Emperor humanity's savior, or its reflection? Was the madness of faith the price of our survival, or the shadow of our fear? These questions remain unanswered, perhaps forever. But perhaps that is mercy, because in the silence that follows beneath the fading light of what once was, something still breathes. It is small, defiant, eternal. It is us. And the galaxy, ancient and wounded, turns once more toward the dawn. If this story moved you, if you felt the weight of the stars and the silence that follows them, like, subscribe, and share. Leave your thoughts below and let your words become part of the remembrance. For even now, stories are what keep the Imperium and humanity alive.